Today I want to talk about 3 books from the Legend of Drizzt series. Now, unfortunately, I don't have those books with me right now, but those books are from a separate trilogy about Drizzt called the Hunter's Blade Trilogy. And those books, the books in the trilogy are the Thousand Orcs, the Lone Drow, and the Two Swords. Yeah, the Two Swords. Those are the 3 that make up this trilogy. Now, this trilogy is the series of stories about Drizzt that comes directly after the events of the main Drizzt series. So in the main Drizzt series, you have books 1 to 13. At least I believe it was 13. It's been some time. 1 to 13, let's say. And then that is composed of different story arcs, like there's the Icewind Dale story arc, which is comprised of like 3 or 4 books, including the Crystal Shard and the Halfling's Gem, books like that. And then there's like the Origins trilogy, or whatever it's called, containing the first 3 books about Drizzt growing up in the Underdark. What these 3 are is 3 set aside from those 13, so chronologically they're not listed as 14, 15, 16, even though technically they kind of are, but it's a separate trilogy with its own story arc just from those 3, with no relation to the previous ones aside from the events that have already occurred. But in theory, you don't have to have read any of the previous 13 to know what's going on in these 3, although it would certainly help. And if you do read these 3 without having read the previous 13, it's going to be a bit of a spoiler alert the whole time, because there's a lot of stuff that they talk about that you should probably already know, but you don't have to read these. But I would very highly recommend you read the first 13 before you get into the Hunter's Blade trilogy. Now, let's talk about these Drizzt books, because these ones are a bit different. These ones center on one central plot the whole time, 2 plots. The first is the concept that there's a group of orcs in the world, or rather all the orc tribes are beginning to band together under a common leader and unite to try and push out the forces of man, the goodly races, dwarves and men, from certain cities, and essentially just claim tons of land, kill people, do orc things. And the second central plot item is that Drizzt believes his friends have all died. Little bit of a spoiler there, but I honestly don't think that's giving away too much, considering it happens fairly quickly in the first book, if I recall. I certainly know it's in the first book. And these are the 2 main ideas of the first 3 books. Now, I enjoyed these concepts, and I'm not saying I didn't like these books, but it felt like the entirety of the 3 books was solely centered around these 2 objects, these 2 ideas. And it probably felt that way because that is how it is. And there's nothing specifically wrong with just following those 2 ideas for 3 books, but you have to understand the concept that it can get it can feel like it's getting drawn out and like it's getting a little boring. And once again, I'm not trying to say this trilogy was bad, because I enjoyed this trilogy. I just think comparatively to some of the previous works of R.A. Salvatore, it was somewhat disappointing, to be honest. And I'm not saying it was bad, once again. I enjoyed the trilogy greatly, and I would highly recommend to anyone that's come this far in the Drizzt series already. Let's face it, if you've read 13 Drizzt books already, you're probably going to read just about anything with Drizzt in it. But I just wanted to get that out there, that while it is a good series, and the trilogy is still nice, it felt lacking in some aspects, which is a real shame, because I know, as do many people, I'm sure, if you've been reading the Drizzt stories, that R.A. Salvatore is a brilliant author, and he is very talented, which is why it's a little disappointing to read these, because it feels like he's lacking. I'm not sure of the context under which these were written, but it almost feels like he just thought, well, I put out Drizzt books and people love them, I'll make 3 more Drizzt books, here you go, kind of thing, and he just threw out 3 more. And once again, that's not literally how it feels, because they are still good books. It's just, they just feel a little less than normal. Which is a real shame, too, considering the books that all follow it, which I'll hopefully talk about in future videos, the Sellswords trilogy, or the Transitions trilogy, the later Neverwinter stories with Drizzt, are all wonderful, and he really, R.A. Salvatore does, picks up the writing style and just blows me away with how well those are written. So to me, this is kind of the slump in the series, in my opinion. But, once again, I want to clarify, they're not bad. I would still recommend them, even if you don't read Drizzt. I think you'd enjoy them for what they are. I don't think it'd be a good starting point at all if you don't read Drizzt. But I do think the average fantasy reader, or really just anyone in general who thinks that they can enjoy a taste of fantasy, would enjoy these books. If I had to give them a rating out of 5 stars, it would honestly probably be about 3.5 or 4 or so. And that's not a bad rating. That's about average. And honestly, it feels like I shouldn't rate them as high just because I know how good they can be, and they weren't that as good as I knew they could have been, if that makes sense. To give an individual breakdown of each story, and this is, once again, my personal opinion, because I know how much people like each story varies, but the first one's called The Thousand Orcs. I thought that one was a little slow. First half of it, setting up the story, pretty slow. Second half, things start to get going, and it gets pretty interesting. Overall, an average book for the series. Second one, The Lone Drow, I liked that one a lot. I thought it was really well done, comparatively to the first. And I stuck with it. I enjoyed it. There were, once again, a few slumps here and there, but it was better than the first, in my opinion. And the third one, The Two Swords, was a bit of a mixed bag. It had some of my favorite parts from all 3 books in it, but it also had some of the slowest parts, in my opinion, from all the 3 books. There were some wonderful battle scenes, some great fights, and some great plots, but also some really slow and boring parts. And I think that's really what this trilogy comes down to being. It comes down to being a good and enjoyable trilogy overall, but unfortunately it is littered with several parts where it just gets bogged down and a little slow to get through. But once again, I enjoyed it, and I think anyone else would, because it was a really nice series. They were fun to read. They just had a few hiccups here and there. And luckily R.A. Salvatore picks it up after these books and really gets back into his writing style. So if you're interested in continuing the story of Drizzt and continuing on with his adventures, and you've finished the main 13 books, the Hunter's Trilogy is the place for you to pick up. And it is an enjoyable read that I think you would enjoy as long as you've kept up with Drizzt this long. Few mistakes, but still really fun. So, if you've read through all of them and you want to read more Drizzt, this is where you go. Hunter's Blade Trilogy. And I'm pretty sure you'll like them if you've read this far. I suppose that's about it. So I hope if you do pick those up, you like them. Maybe you'll like them more than me, which would be great. I'd love it if you guys liked the books more than I did. Otherwise, hope you like the books, and thank you for watching.